Hello, I hope you're well today. From what we can gather from his second letter to the Corinthians, it seems that in the eyes of the so-called super apostles who were vying for leadership there, that Paul didn't show sufficiently the signs of being a true apostle. Apparently, one of the charges against Paul was that he had not had enough ecstatic experiences, that he was just too earthbound. Any true apostle would have more to say about what went on up above, they thought. So Paul reported a vision in which he was caught up to the third heaven, to paradise. Heaven, the abode of God, was depicted as multi-layered, usually 7-layered by many at that time. By entering the third heaven, one could stand near the Lord. Now, Paul didn't get too specific about the experience, but he did say that he heard things there too holy to repeat. His visit to the third heaven elated him, Paul said, but when he came back down to earth, he stepped on a thorn which had been sticking him ever since. He took the thorn to be a messenger from Satan, sent to keep him from ever being too elated about a vision or anything else. Of course, much ink has been spilled about just what this thorn was. Whatever it was, he couldn't get rid of it. And maybe that's what's so fascinating, that this holy man who had been to the third heaven and back, this spiritual giant, this greatest missionary of all time, had something physical going on with him that bothered him every day of his life. Sounds a lot like us, come to think of it. Through the day, during the night, when he prayed or when he preached, that thorn was there. It got in Paul's way so much that he begged God 3 times to take it away. The answer God gave was Paul's big revelation to share, a lot bigger for him than anything he heard in the third heaven. My grace is sufficient for you, God said, for power is made perfect in weakness. In this divine no, Paul understood more clearly the nature of God's power. If his opponents boasted of spectacular things, Paul was obliged to boast of his weaknesses, not because weakness itself was glorious, but because it was where Christ's power was most clearly displayed. Who would have thought it? It was in that thorn in the flesh, not in a trip to the third heaven, where Paul found the power of Christ. We may wish it were otherwise, and it may seem mean on God's part, but I don't think so. God knows we've all got problems and suffer from one thorn or another. We've all had some shipwrecks and feel flogged from time to time. The good news is that none of that disqualifies us from serving God. On the contrary, put those wounds on your resume, because the fact that the church survives with people like us in it is the best proof we have that Christ is alive and well, and, as in Paul's case, dwelling in us. Therefore, Paul says, I delight in sickness, insult, pressing needs, persecution, and distress. His final summation is one of the most quotable quotes in the Bible. When I am weak, then I am strong. How else could we have made it this far? As individuals or as a community? God's grace is sufficient for us. In the midst of our losses, in a pandemic, carrying our thorns, we discover that the power of Christ is made perfect in weakness.